Deep within the darkening forest of Soltran, something began to stir. Creatures long hidden beneath the Earth's surface started to emerge, mutated by an ancient force, the Xynar. These beings, twisted and contorted by years of exposure to the forbidden energies beneath the world, had returned to reclaim the land they once called their own. Their bodies were a grotesque mockery of their former selves, six-limbed with eyes that flickered in different hues, their bodies bearing rough crystalline growths that granted them unpredictable, destructive powers. Soltran had been a sacred place for centuries, a forest preserved by the Velyrians to maintain the balance of their world. But now, the Xynar, ravenous and furious, threatened to undo everything the blue-skinned race had worked so hard to protect. The first encounter occurred during the gathering of the Velyrian Council, a powerful circle of elders charged with maintaining peace and order in the realm. Leora, a young Valyrian with a gift for foresight, was the first to sense the disturbance. The visions had been coming to her for weeks, glimpses of fractured worlds, cries of war, and the collapse of the sacred balance. "I saw them," she whispered to her mentor, Caloran, her eyes wide with fear. "The Xynar. Their awakening." Caloran, one of the most revered elders, felt the weight of her words. He had heard the legends of the Xynar, but that was all they had ever been to him, myths from a time long past. Now he realized those myths were clawing their way back into reality. The Xynar, once noble beings, had succumbed to the forbidden knowledge of the Oplornic crystals. These crystals held immense power, far beyond what any being should possess. Those who touched them were granted unmeasurable strength, but the cost was steep. Over time, their bodies twisted, and their minds fractured into chaos. The crystals consumed them, reshaping them into beings driven by the urge to conquer and destroy. Valyria's first battles with the Xynar were brutal. The blue-skinned warriors were not prepared for the brute force and raw energy the creatures wielded. Their elemental abilities seemed weak in comparison to the destructive power of the Xynar, whose crystalline forms could absorb and redirect energy in devastating ways. As villages fell, Leora and Caloran led a desperate defense, hoping to delay the inevitable. But with every day that passed, it became clear that they could not win this war through strength alone. In a desperate bid to turn the tide, Caloran turned to the oldest texts of Valyrian history, the ones that spoke of a time before the Xynar, before the Crystal Plague. Buried deep within the archives, he found references to an ancient artifact, the Starseed, said to hold the key to restoring the balance between their two races. It was a long-forgotten legend, one that spoke of the Starseed as a bridge between worlds, a tool not just for war, but for understanding. But there was a risk. The Starseed had never been used, and its power was unknown. Leora had no choice but to trust in the legends. The young seer began to experience vivid dreams, guiding her to a location hidden deep within the forbidden Nalta's caves, a place where reality itself seemed to warp and twist. It was said the Starseed was hidden there, guarded by ancient forces older than even the Xynar. The journey to Nalta's was treacherous. Leora, accompanied by a small band of Valyrian warriors, descended into the abyss, where the very air crackled with unstable energy. As they ventured deeper, the lines between time and space seemed to blur. Shadows moved on their own, and echoes of ancient voices whispered warnings to turn back. But Leora pressed on. Her determination grew with every step, driven by the knowledge that the future of her people, and perhaps the entire world, depended on what they found within the cave. At the heart of Naltiz, they found it. The Starseed was nothing like they had imagined. It wasn't a weapon or a tool of destruction, but a swirling orb of pure energy, its surface rippling with the colors of the cosmos. It hummed with a strange warmth, as if it was alive, waiting for someone to unlock its true potential. But as they reached for it, the ground trembled. The Xynar had followed them. The final confrontation took place in the depths of the cave. As the mutated creatures swarmed around them, Leora activated the Starseed, unleashing a wave of energy that flooded the chamber. The power of the artifact forced the Velyrians and Xynar alike to their knees, their minds filled with visions of their shared past, of a time before the war, when the two races were one. It was then that Leora understood. The Starseed wasn't a weapon. It was a memory, a reminder of who they once were. The war between their races had been sparked by the Crystal Plague, a force that had corrupted the Xynar and driven them mad. The Starseed held the cure. But the question remained, could they trust the Xynar to accept it? Would they embrace the chance for peace? Or would the darkness of the crystals consume them forever? Leora's heart pounded as the cavern filled with an eerie glow, the Starseed's light illuminating the grotesque figure of Tyrell. His once majestic form, now marred by jagged crystalline growths, stood motionless before her. Though his body was broken, his gaze held the weight of centuries. A complex mix of fury, sorrow, and something akin to hope. The Xynar leader seemed to struggle within himself, torn between his race's thirst for conquest and the distant memory of their noble past. Leora could feel the weight of the artifact in her hands, its ancient energy pulsing through her veins, whispering the long-lost truths of their shared history. She understood now the Xynar were not inherently evil. They were victims of the Oplornic crystals, corrupted over millennia by their power. The Starseed could heal them, but only if they allowed it. Tyrell, she called out, her voice steady but pleading. You can feel it, can't you? The memories of your people, before the corruption. This war doesn't need to end in blood. Tyrell's crystalline eyes glowed fiercely, flickering between rage and contemplation. We have suffered in darkness for too long, Leora. My people, twisted by these crystals, have forgotten what we once were. Do you think a simple artifact can undo millennia of pain? Leora took a deep breath, stepping closer. This artifact is more than a simple relic. It holds the truth of who you are, who we all are. If you let the Starseed restore your people, they will remember, just as you do now. Behind them, the walls of Naltas groaned under the pressure of the immense power swirling within the chamber. The Velyrians and Xynar soldiers, locked in tense standoffs, watched with bated breath as their leaders stood at the precipice of war or salvation. One wrong move and the entire cave could collapse, taking both armies with it. Tyrell's gaze flicked to the crystal-infested warriors behind him. Their grotesque forms were a testament to the suffering of his people. He remembered them before the corruption, before the madness had twisted their minds. There had been a time when the Xynar were wise, just as the Velyrians were. Could that time return? I have seen what happens when we trust too easily, Leora. The crystals gave us power, but it came with a cost. One I'm not sure we can ever fully repay. Leora felt the tension in the air. The future of their world, the fate of two ancient races, hung by a thread. She could feel the Starseed's energy pulsing, resonating with the land, calling out for unity. You don't have to decide alone, Leora said, her voice soft but firm. Let your people decide. Offer them the chance for redemption, for freedom from the crystal's grip. Tyrell's face twisted in thought, and for a moment, it seemed as though the corruption might win. But then, he took a deep breath, the flickering lights of his crystalline body dimming. Very well, Tyrell said at last, his voice strained but resolute. But know this, Leora. If they choose war, it will be your people who suffer. With a slow, deliberate motion, Tyrell extended his hand toward the Starseed, allowing the ancient artifact's energy to envelop him. A bright surge of light erupted from the chamber, flowing through both the Velyrians and the Xynar. For a brief moment, the weight of the past lifted, revealing the true forms of each race, before the corruption, before the endless war. The effect was instantaneous. The Xynar soldiers, whose grotesque, mutated bodies had long since forgotten their original shapes, began to transform. The crystalline growths receded, revealing their true forms, once majestic beings with silvery skin and glowing eyes, similar in stature and elegance to the Velyrians. Gasps filled the chamber as the two armies saw each other, not as enemies, but as the two halves of a shattered whole. The memories flowed freely through the Starseed, connecting both races to the time before the Great Split, when they had coexisted in peace and harmony. Tyrell, his body now free of the corruption, looked down at his hands in disbelief. The crystalline tumors were gone, his form restored to its original glory. He met Leora's gaze, no longer as an enemy, but as a fellow leader struggling to save his people. The memories, Tyrell whispered, his voice filled with awe. I can see them all. Leora nodded. The Starseed holds the collective memory of our people, untainted by time. It's not just a tool for healing. It's a reminder of what we were meant to be. The glow from the Starseed bathed the cavern in soft light, its energy slowly fading as the transformation completed. The air was thick with the weight of a decision made, but the tension between the two races had begun to dissolve. Tyrell turned to his people, their forms restored, but their minds still grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. The choice, it seemed, would still be theirs to make. You have given us back our past, Leora, Tyrell said, his voice solemn. But the future, that is a path we must choose together. The days following the transformation were filled with tentative peace. The Velyrians and the Xynar began to work side by side, rebuilding the lands destroyed by their long war. The restoration of their collective memory had not erased the years of conflict, but it had opened a door to healing and understanding. Leora and Tyrell, now allies, led the effort to stabilize their world. The Oplornic crystals, still dangerous in their power, were carefully gathered and locked away in a vault deep within the earth, where they could no longer corrupt future generations. It wasn't easy. The scars of the war were still fresh, and there were those on both sides who struggled to trust their former enemies. But as time passed, the hope of a united future began to take root. As Leora stood on the cliffs overlooking the once dark forests of Soltrin, now bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. They had done it. They had chosen peace over war, and in doing so, they had saved not just their races but their world. Tyrell approached, standing beside her, his face thoughtful. Do you think it will last? He asked, his voice low. Leora smiled. Peace is never easy, Tyrell. But we've given our people a chance, a real chance. What they do with it is up to them. Tyrell nodded, his gaze distant as he watched the horizon. We will watch over them. Together, Leora felt the weight of his words and knew he was right. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time in centuries, they had a future worth fighting for. Months passed since the unification of the Velyrians and Xynar. While peace had taken root, the tension of centuries of war was not so easily undone. Deep beneath the surface, lingering mistrust still simmered. Small skirmishes between rogue groups occasionally threatened the fragile truce. But Leora and Tyrell remained steadfast, working tirelessly to maintain the delicate balance they had fought so hard to achieve. The restoration of the Xynar to their original forms had been miraculous, but the struggle to find their place in this new world left many feeling displaced. Some longed for the power the Oplornic crystals had granted them, believing the loss of their corrupted strength had made them vulnerable. Whispers of rebellion began to stir, led by those unwilling to embrace the path of unity. Leora knew that the peace they had brokered could not last without addressing the deeper fears still rooted in both races. It was time for a final act, one that would either cement their future together or unravel everything they had built. In a solemn meeting with Tyrell, Leora proposed what would become known as the final Rite, a gathering of both Velyrians and Xynar, where the two races would stand as one to confront their past and choose their future. The Starseed would once again be called upon, this time to offer each individual the chance to let go of the war and its scars or to reject the unity and face the consequences. It must be their choice, Leora insisted as she and Tyrell stood in the ancient hall of Soltrin, the heart of the unified lands. If we force peace upon them, it will never last. But if they choose it freely, we may have a chance to truly heal. Tyrell's expression was grave, but he nodded. You're right. We've given them the truth. Now they must decide what to do with it. The final Rite was announced, and a sense of inevitability swept over the land. Both races gathered at Soltrin, standing before the restored temple that had once been the seat of their combined civilization. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension palpable as old wounds resurfaced, threatening to tear the fragile peace apart. As the gathered masses stood before the temple, Leora and Tyrell stepped forward, holding the Starseed between them. Its glow pulsed gently, a reminder of the power it held, the power to heal or to destroy. Leora's voice rang out, strong and clear. We stand at the crossroads of our future. For too long we have fought and bled, driven by forces that twisted our minds and hearts. But now we have a choice. The Starseed has given us back our history, and with it, the power to decide our own fate. Tyrell's deep voice followed, carrying the weight of his people's suffering. The crystals took everything from us. They turned us into monsters, forced us to forget who we were. But now the choice is ours. Will we embrace the future as one people, or will we return to the darkness? Silence fell over the crowd as the Starseed's light intensified, filling the air with a sense of possibility. Slowly, one by one, members of both races approached, touching the artifact. Those who accepted the piece felt a surge of warmth, a sense of belonging as the memories of their shared history filled their minds. They chose to move forward, to rebuild together. But there were those who could not let go. A small group of Xynar, their faces twisted with anger and fear, stepped forward and rejected the Starseed's offer. They believed the power of the crystals was their birthright, that peace was a lie designed to weaken them. Tyrell watched them with sorrow in his eyes, but he did not stop them. They have made their choice, he said quietly to Leora. Now we must make ours. The rebel group, now fully revealed as dissenters, fled into the night, disappearing into the mountains where the last remnants of the Oplornic crystals still lay hidden. Tyrell and Leora knew that peace would always have its enemies, but they had given their people the chance to choose a different path. It was all they could do. With the final rite complete, the world began to heal in earnest. The rebel Xynar were few in number, and though they remained a threat, their power had diminished. Most of the Velyrians and Xynar embraced the unity that the Starseed had offered, working together to rebuild the temples and cities that had long been abandoned. Leora and Tyrell continued to lead their people, not as rulers, but as guides, ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten. The Starseed was placed in a sacred chamber within the Temple of Soltrin, where it would remain as a symbol of the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. One evening, as the twin moons of their world rose high into the sky, casting a soft glow over the land, Leora stood on the balcony of the temple, watching the horizon. Tyrell joined her, his presence a comforting reminder of the bond they had forged. "Do you think it's truly over?" Leora asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains where the rebels had fled. Tyrell was silent for a moment before answering. "There will always be those who seek power in darkness. But I believe the majority have chosen the light. We've given them the tools to build a better future. Now it's up to them." Leora nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope, not just for their world, but for herself. She had spent so long fighting, struggling to survive in a world torn apart by war. Now, at last, she could see a future worth living for. As the moons cast their light over the land, Leora turned to Tyrell with a small smile. "We did it." Tyrell smiled back, a rare but genuine expression of contentment. "Yes, we did." And with that, the two leaders stood together, watching as the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, signaling the beginning of a new era.